That was U.S. President Barack Obama talking about human sex trafficking. Well, joining us now from Los Angeles is Conchita Sarnoff. She's the executive director of the Alliance to Rescue Victims of Trafficking. Here with me in Washington is Tina Frunt. She fell under the influence of a trafficker at the age of 13. A survivor, she founded Courtney's House, a non-profit that helps young people escape domestic sex trafficking and commercial sex exploitation. And from New York, we're joined by the award-winning documentary filmmaker Jane Wells. Her company, 3 Generations, is dedicated to helping survivors of atrocities tell their stories. Ladies, welcome to all of you. Jane, let me start with you. You made that documentary called Tricked. Let's look at an excerpt from Tricked.
Let me tell you, a cute young little girl is pursuit of happiness.
An escort service is just a classier way to say you're a prostitute.
You know, I was 17, but the age of girls being forced into prostitution is 12.
It's with that girl you went to elementary school with. It's with your friend at your office. It's his daughter.
Here we have a culture that says it's okay to lie to someone's daughter, and it's okay to beat her, and it's okay to make her go out and sell herself for money.
Jane, when we talk about sex trafficking, we often think of it, especially where it concerns children, as a problem that is predominantly in the developing world. But here we have it. It's happening right here in the United States. It's here and it's everywhere. How big is this problem in the U.S.?
I think it's a problem in every city, every town across the nation, and that's really what we tried to show in the film, that it can happen in every town, and it is happening in every town.
Tina, I've been reading your story, and to say that you had a harrowing childhood would be a gross understatement. As we mentioned at the outset there, you were first exploited at the age of 13, and we really are grateful for you coming on the show to tell us your story. How, when, and why did this, well, how did it begin?
Actually, how it really began was I grew up inside of the foster care in Chicago, Illinois. And actually, my beginning situation started at 9 years old inside of foster care, with foster parents selling me and boys. When I was 12, I was adopted to a wonderful family. But when I was 13, I met a man who was 15 years older than me. And I didn't even know that he was a trafficker. You know, and so he wooed me. He did not try to have sex with me right away or anything like that. This took a few months of really gaining trust.
And this was in Chicago?
And this was originally in Chicago, Illinois, yes. And with that being said, one day when I left home, and I don't say run away because I was actually upset with my parents on my 14th birthday and wasn't allowed to go out past 9:30. And so in my head, I was actually just going to leave and come back home. He told me to call him, which I did if I needed anything, be there in 15 minutes. I didn't know we were going to be on our way to Cleveland, Ohio. And so I really think using the word runaway all the time for survivors of they just all ran away, well, that was a manipulation process of a grown person, me thinking I'm coming to return home. But also leaving one trafficking situation, so that's being sold inside of foster care, into another that seemed to be different. And so that's really what happens to survivors of sex trafficking. One situation looks different, and then you get into another.
So you didn't really get any protection, or the protection that is supposed to be afforded to you in foster care?
I didn't get any protection inside of foster care. If I was 9, then 90% of all of our survivors, including myself, were sexually abused before the trafficking. So before 9 was sexual abuse inside the foster care.
Right. Conchita, you focused a great deal on trafficking in Latin America and the exploitation of children. Now in Latin America, of course, you have the problem where many kids are left alone in their homes because their parents are working in the United States, many of them as undocumented immigrants here in the United States. And then you have this other insidious problem of children being recruited by brutal, violent, vicious gangs in Central America and in Latin America. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I wrote an article that was published in the Financial Times during the border crisis in August of this year. And as I conducted my research down at the border at Calexico and Imperial and Central, the 3 border cities between Mexico and the United States, I found, having interviewed many women and children, that the gang, it's an LA-based gang called MS, otherwise known as Mara Salvatrucha, is actually actively sourcing, trafficking, and transporting children and young women into the United States. They not only work as a a international organization, as a network, a cartel. They also work hand in hand with the local drug cartels in Latin America, specifically the Mexican drug cartels, Los Zetas and the Sinaloa cartel, El Golfo, Tijuana, and other cartels that are very powerful on the northern border between the United States and Mexico. So we have an enormous problem in the United States because many of the children from Central and South America and Mexico are being trafficked by MS into the United States and then across the United States.
Okay. Jane, you know, while I was researching the show, I came across an audiovisual presentation which was done by Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times journalist. He's done a lot of work about the exploitation of children. In fact, he has championed their cause in many instances. And I looked at one of his slides of, you know, children, and this is what the slide said. It said, "The day of my investigation of the leading online sex trafficking forum led me to the most unlikely place, Wall Street investment banks." These are the places, of course, where we find the high flyers, you know, the 1% as they're known. This is America's soft underbelly. I mean, it's happening right here in our backyard and in a place like Wall Street.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's very important that we look at the issue of who's coming in and that there are victims there, but we also have to ask ourselves, what is the demand and who are the purchasers? And, you know, to think that anybody we know is exempted from this is a real mistake. I think that's something I've been trying to stress, is that, you know, we're all part of the cycle, whether it's me raising sons, how am I raising my sons to think it's okay to, you know, have bachelor parties and work on Wall Street and do this with impunity? Because yes, pimps and traffickers work with impunity, but at the same time, it's the purchasers of commercial sex who are doing this with impunity without understanding the true harm that they are inflicting on young girls and boys. So I think it's sort of endemic to our entire culture, absolutely.
Can I just add something? Referring to your Wall Street question, I wrote several articles back in 2010, 2011 about a specific Wall Street hedge fund manager, considered to be a billionaire, who is now a registered sex offender level 3, and whose 9-year-long case continues in the state of Florida. The focus, I think, certainly at the state level and federal level, should be in enforcement of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And if every state were to enforce the law that we currently have in place, then it would be a much easier and it would be a much safer community for children to be able to come forward and demand restitution from traffickers such as this particular man.
Tina, what struck me about what you were saying earlier on about being exploited in foster care, there are so many children in foster care right now. I mean, is there any monitoring of what happens to children in foster care or even in juvenile detention centers, you know? And we know that judges in juvenile courts have this predilection to send kids into these places for lengthy periods of time. Do we know what happens to them?
Well, I think some of that is beginning to change, where they're trying not to put them in in juvenile detention. However, they are still charging them, putting them on probation to be watched. So maybe not for prostitution, but on probation. And in foster care, around the country, they are really trying to train social workers and have better protocols and procedures. So what I'm going to say to that is I think that's really good. But also, the group homes where the children stay and the foster families need to be screened. They also need to have an assessment for that and be trained as properly as well. And so I think listening and understanding, they could recognize kind of pimp control, but don't recognize family, where family members are actually trafficking their children, and that's why they enter the foster care. And so that screening process, I think, is still being developed, and that's what really needs to be focused on, because it's coming in as child sexual abuse, but not sex trafficking. The right questions aren't being asked.
You know, I have to ask you this. You came under the influence of this man, as you told me, who was much older than you, who sold you, literally, into the sex trade. How did you get out of it?
So I think that's a difficult question to ask, and I think that people want one answer.
Because you never get out of it.
Because it's from 9 to my mid-20s, so it wasn't just one thing, you know? It was a whole process. The thing is this, I was hidden in plain sight. So actually traffickers do take you to church. You go to church, Sometimes they use that against you, saying that you were always born to be a prostitute or you're supposed to. And that's important because many of our survivors were going to church. So inside the church where you think it's a safe space, you're going there, but you're not getting the help because people don't understand it and they're judging you by your experience and your appearance of who you are. So plain sight means these kids are in plain sight. They go to stores, they go to CVS, some go to school. No one really understands. They judge a situation and thinks it's your own choice, when I was out in the open every day and no one helped me.
And, you know, if you needed medical help, say therapy at that time, I mean, do you get it?
So when you enter a trafficking situation, that means that if you were on any pills for mental health, for anything like that, they usually have you not take them and say that you don't need those pills. So you don't have access to that. You can go to free clinics and things, but I came from a family where it was a family who trafficked you. So the grandmother, who was 70 years old, was a nurse for many years. And she is the one who would bandage us up in the house.
Thank you very much for joining us, Tina. We're going to have to leave it there. Time's caught up with us. Tina with me here in the studio, Conchita in Los Angeles, Jane in New York. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us your questions, comments, and story ideas to theheat@cctv-america.com. And, of course, we'd like to continue the conversation online. Give us your thoughts and comments on Facebook at CCTV America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
From Wall Street to Beijing, and every business center in between, we make sense of global finance by stripping away the numbers and focusing on what matters to you the most. Biz Asia, America. We've got you covered.